have your notes, you can pull them out now. We're going to talk a little bit about time today. You know, we're in this series called Reset, and as things begin to get to normal, or at least change from, it's COVID, to whatever post-COVID's going to be, here's what we're looking at. It's the idea that instead of just being driven by the urgent matters of the day, let's take a step back and let's do a reset, like start over, pull the plug on how we're just going and pause and then think, okay, how do we want our life to go forward? And we're looking in different areas of our lives. And really what I want to look at today is your calendar. And I became convicted of this because it's real easy just to get into freak out mode, putting out fire mode. You know, you're just like going. And you're going from one thing to another. And sometimes if we just keep going, we'll just flame out ourselves. And that doesn't honor God. And let me show you a picture on the screen. This looks like my calendar. Can we have that picture on the screen? You know, you just have stuff on there and things change because someone gets COVID or they think they might have COVID. You need to get tested and, oh my gosh, we're going to do, we're going to, you know. Then you just throw in normal things like, what about dinner? What about laundry? We got to mow the yard. You know, things are just taking over and we're trying to adjust and jump from one day to the next. And finally just hold your hands up and surrender. Like, help, I need help. Because the calendar, our schedule can seem to be controlling us instead of the other way around. And so today, let's look at, you look at yours, I'll look at mine. How can we make sure that we are taking care of what is most important? That is, I think, an essential matter. And by the way, you know, if you ask people how you're doing, well, the number one answer you get, oh, I'm busy, right? Now, busy's not necessarily bad, but if we're busy doing the things that aren't really important, that is bad. Especially if busy is keeping us from doing what we should be doing. That's really bad. So we're going to look at this. So let's look at this passage today from Luke chapter 10. You've heard it before if you've been in church for a while. Let me read it to you. It says, while they were traveling, and the they is Jesus and his disciples, he entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister named Mary, who also sat at the Lord's feet and was listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks, and she came up and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to serve all alone? Tell her to give me a hand. You know the story. They're busy, right? Martha's busy, and Mary's just like laying around, is how she's trying to paint it. And she's expecting Jesus to say, Martha, you're right. This is so unfair. Come on, Mary, pull your part. But look what he says in verse 41. The Lord answered, Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things. But one thing is necessary, and Mary has made the right choice, and it will not be taken away from her. Now, I know there are many topics that you could preach from. You've probably heard from this sermon or this passage. Now, let me just say this up front. The way you interpret a text matters. You can't just read this and go, oh, yeah, Mary's laying down on the couch, and, you know, you start making up whatever you want about that. Here's what you need to do. Whenever you interpret, there's a science to interpreting text. And so when we look at the Bible, what is important is to know what is the author's intention. It's very easy to take 2021 and our mindset, and we put it in. We try to like lay it over the text and go, well, this is how we would do this very thing. And it could be absolutely different culture, different people, different worldviews, different understandings. So you can't just do that. So you need to, in your interpretation, the step is understand what is the author saying and what is actually happening in first century Israel. Okay, then once you get that idea, you find out what's the principle, the main point that's being taught. If it's like Jesus teaching a parable or something, find out what's the main point. And then, what is the application for today? So there's a few steps. You can't just jump in and start pulling things out because that's not being true to the text. Now, I've heard a lot of different things taught using this passage. And really, they're all right. There's some that would say, well, Jesus here is certainly saying, you know what, Mary, you shouldn't sweat the small stuff. Some are saying, well, you know what, this is a really good passage. And what Jesus is doing, he's elevating the value of women in a culture that did not. And there's lots of different ways we could look at this. You could even say, well, the point here of the story is that Jesus is saying you should prioritize me over everything else. All of those are true, but I want to take a different angle here, and I think this is really about time management as well. So it's a little bit different, I know. Follow with me, and you can see how I'm a heretic, but that's okay. Here's what I want to see. Let's go to the next slide if we can. Okay, we have Martha. She is focused on the tasks. Mary is focused on the relationship. That's what's happening in this story, and that's why I wrote at the very top, in this story at this moment. We don't know what was happening the day before, or even before Jesus showed up at the house. All we're reading is what was happening at this time after Jesus arrived. And what was happening is Martha is focusing on the tasks. Mary is focused on relationships. Now, what's funny is I brought this up in our staff meeting this week. And we were actually talking about this, but this is even before I didn't even plan on preaching this, actually, to be honest. But here's the thing. If you're having people over to your house, what is most important? The tasks or the relationships? And you know what I love? Pastor Mark said, yes, meaning they're both important. Have you ever had someone say, hey, I'm right around the corner. I'm going to stop by real quick. Is that okay? Have you had that? And you usually lie and go, sure, that'd be great, right? And then you're just look like the Tasmanian devil, a tornado, trying to throw things in the closet and, under the bed, and you're just trying to make it look presentable. Now, that's tasks, right? Tasks. That's important. But then once the guest arrives, you want to stop doing the tasks. You want to focus on the relationships because people always trump the stuff, right? Always tasks. So tasks and then relationships. Now, let me ask you this. If you're a parent, you'll especially understand this. But imagine if you have an hour for someone's coming over to your house. They're going to be there in 60 minutes, and you're just like everywhere. You're trying to clean up and put up and all this. And your teenager is laying on the couch and say, hey, Mom, would you move? I can't see the TV. And you are just thinking, why don't they understand what I'm doing? Why don't they say it? How can I help? And the answer is because they're a teenager, right? Okay, so let's say they're laying there, and you finally just have had enough, because you're stressed, because it's getting closer and closer, and it's just ticking down, and you're like, why don't you help me? And what if your teenager said this? Mother, you are worried and so upset over about many things, but only one thing is necessary, and I have made the right choice. I would love to see your response to that. And my guess is it probably wouldn't be fit to write in the Bible, all right? Oh, mother. That's what Jesus said to her, And I just imagine Martha, she probably didn't go, oh, you're so right. She probably went, and just walked off. And I'm sure if she could have, she just grabbed his neck. Like, are you kidding me? Because if you've been in that kind of situation, when you're racing around and trying to get ready, it can be frantic and just a very stressful situation. So here's what I'm taking away, and I think certainly is an application, probably some level of what happened here with Mary and Martha. Before Jesus comes, the tasks should be important. Because it wasn't even just get your laundry out of the living room. It was, she's preparing a meal. Okay, so there's work and tasks that must be done. But you want to get it done before the guests arrive. Because then you can't enjoy the relationship. So me as pastor from 2,000 years later, I'm going, Martha, you should have started this whole thing earlier, you know? Mary, you should have helped before Jesus got here. Complete what needs to be done before the guest comes, and then you're able to enjoy what's going on. And so I think it's really about time management. If we can have the next slide here, you'll see. Think about this. We have limited resources. We have limited money, limited talents, limited time. But we can always find more resources, right? Asking around. We can always earn more money. And we can even develop talents. But we cannot manufacture more time. The time that you have is limited. And so what I think is important for us, that you are a good steward with your time. Yesterday, I did a funeral for a lady who was not even 52 years old. Now, I know any of us, if we were writing out the story of how someone's life would go, we would never write, well, at 52, you're over. But we don't know what tomorrow holds. And we only have an opportunity for what's in front of us. We can plan for what's ahead of us, but we don't know when that's going to end. And even with our plans, let's be honest, we can only make plans we can't guarantee. But I think it's important that we're organized and thoughtful so that when that time comes that's in the future, we're ready and we're able to make the most of it. Because when that hour is gone, it's gone. When that day is gone, it's gone forever. Next slide. If we don't learn good time management, we'll always be running late. We'll always be stressed. The urgent situations, the emergencies will be what runs our life. And it will prevent us from taking care of the important things. Let me ask you, if someone's asked you, do you pray enough? What would you say? Most people say, no, I should probably pray more. I pray, but I should pray more. How about reading? You ever get talking to someone about reading? Have you ever said, man, I wish I had time to read. I wish I read more. You know, I wonder how many people would say, man, I wish I had more time for my family. I wish I would have made more time for my kids or my spouse. Here's the truth. We have a limited number of hours. You and I get to choose how do we spend our time. You know that? God, He doesn't make you a robot where you have to do exactly whatever's been programmed. He doesn't even make you an animal that just responds to instincts, like your dog when he sees the dog food and he gets all excited, right? He allows us to operate by choice. And so that means we have a stewardship aspect of our time. So what we're going to look at today is how can we make the most of our time? As your pastor, I would hate, and I don't want you to, you're standing before God and you just said, man, I wish I would have done more. I wish I would have. I wish this could have. And the truth is, we all have opportunities, but we all got to make the right choices with our time. So we're going to look at 3 ways that I think will be helpful, because time killers will kill the time. And I want to make sure you're not the time killer, okay? So here's what we're going to do. Let's look at this. This is extremely, I think, practical. This is application-driven for the rest of this going forward, because I think Mary and Martha could have had, especially Martha, she could have had a wonderful time with Jesus at the house, but she was too twisted up because of her calendar. So how can we manage my time and your time? Number 1, schedule what is most important. And if you need to write it out on a calendar, on a piece of paper, or in a digital form on your phone, do it. You have to start with what is most important. The next part of the slide, it says, good time management doesn't mean you do more, but it means you do more of what matters most. That's the point of having a calendar. Not that you do more, but the things that are most important, you take care of. So, I know the truth, and I've been here so many times. When you say, this is what's most important, however, here's what my life is really doing, here's what my real lifestyle is, the further these two are apart, the greater your frustration that you will have. When you say, my life's values, or I stand for, this is my highest priority, but you're not doing it, you will get extremely frustrated. And that's not a good witness, right? So I want to show you, here's a picture. This is my wife and I, the last date we went on 30 years ago, right here. No, I'm teasing. You know, this reminds me, I need to make sure that I have time with my spouse scheduled. And depending on the season of life, it might be a Friday or a Wednesday night or something. We have it, and we need to protect it. But sometimes even then, with good intentions, it's easy to not even have those times. But for those, for you have some people that are most important in your life. If you need to write it down, write it down. Because the ones most important are very often the ones we leave out. And we often think, well, they'll understand. I don't know how many times I've given away date nights to my job. That's stealing from my wife. For a job. A job is never worth your spouse or a family member, right? Let me show you the next picture. I'm proud of this because this is my son, Eli. Now, Charlene and I have always said from the beginning, for our children, they are the most important disciples in my life, in our life, right? I've worked in a church for over 30 years. Like, that's all I've done, really. But the most important disciples I will ever have are my children. We always talk, always talk, and a disciple that way. But this week was the first time intentionally I said, Eli, we're going to go through a study together. And you know, I just realized, matter of fact, I tried to make it happen like 2 weeks ago, and I couldn't do it because I didn't calendar it. Something else came up, and the next week something else came up, and I realized this is ridiculous. I need to take control of my calendar. And so we did that. If you need to write it down, write it down. But what is most important, schedule it. Because if you don't, the time stealers will come and take it away. And it's not worth sacrificing that for the things that are most important. So, now, for me, here's my priorities. Number one, it's always God. Prayer, Bible reading, it's my time with God, daily time with God. It's not my calendar. I don't need to do that because it's a habit now. But I know when it's going to happen. I know exactly when it's going to happen. So in those cases, you don't need necessarily to write it down. But if you need to, write it down. Second is my family. I need to make sure that there's time for them in my calendar. Then third is sermon prep. I mean, that's like the primary thing for my job and my calling. So I protect those days, and I have to. Next is like working out, because I'm a better person when I'm working out. So whatever your top 3 or 4 things are, put them on the calendar. It's simple, but yet so distinct. Many of us don't. We just think, well, we'll get to it. Oh, I don't need to do that. And in the process, we end up just not doing that. Second point here, I think this is really good for you to look at. Point number 2, I need to say no to the many small things and yes to the few big things. of all the things you do, what is the most important that you need to do? I bet there's a bunch of stuff in there you don't need to do. Matter of fact, a lot of things can be time killers. Busy doesn't mean you're productive, but we need to make sure we're doing the right things. You know, here's the next slide. Don't ask, can I do this, but should I do this? There are some things you can delegate to other family members, other people at work, other friends. You know, and if you have the means, hey, you don't need to mow the yard. Have someone else do it. Delegate it to whoever, right? Whatever it is. Again, all of our lives are very different. There are things you can say no to. And by saying no, it allows you to say yes to the important and actually be even better at the important. So, here's the next slide, this is a quote from a pastor. Whenever you say yes to something, that means there's less of you for something else. There's only so much we can give, only so much time we have. And so to everything that you say yes to, that's pulling away a little bit of you from the other things. So determine, you get to choose what's most important. Number 3. Third thing, set a deadline for your deadlines. Set a deadline for your deadlines. Here's what I mean by this. You know, I'm a person, like if I have a project, there's some kind of decision I need to make, I'm a person, though I can make a quick decision, I don't like to make a quick decision. I prefer to think and pray and think and pray. And that can lead to the point where it's almost procrastination, you know, like, hey, we've already left on this project here. You missed out. But I know, especially in church work, sometimes you need to go slow because you don't want to jump fast and then it's the wrong decision because it can affect a lot of people. But anyway, here's what needs to happen. There's got to be deadlines, but don't focus on the actual deadline. Put a deadline ahead of the deadline. Let me put it this way. My actual deadline for sermon preparation to being done is Sunday morning at 9 a.m., right? Because that's when I'm preaching. And it's preparation all the way. But my deadline is Thursday morning. I need to have my notes in and all that. Now, there's still some things that I do, but I have to have my sermon done, the majority of it, as of now, Thursday morning. And by doing that, it allows me to sort of relax a little bit. You know, I'm not so stressed out. You know what deadlines are like, right? Man, they can just add tremendous stress. And I don't know about you, but man, I'm just not sometimes a good Christian witness when I'm stressed out. Okay, now, we're going to stop talking about me in this example and talk about someone else. But I was coming over the bridge yesterday onto the beach, and it was just, you know how it is here on the weekends, right? There was one guy in front of me. We turned onto Gulf Boulevard, and he stopped in the middle of the road. So I just go around him. Didn't inconvenience him whatsoever. And all of a sudden I look back, and he's honking and showing me his middle finger, what it looks like. And I'm going, what is his deal? So I don't know what it is, but I need to make sure I don't ever react like that. And you know, when I am not edge to edge on the deadline of trying to, again, accomplish tasks or projects, man, you know, there's just not even the stress level that we don't have to react like that. And that is sure a better way to live. It's better for our hearts and our blood pressure and everything else. But when we set the deadline before the actual deadline, man, that's one way it causes us to be proactive. Have you ever noticed on the week before you leave for vacation how much work you accomplish? Magically, we do more than, we make sure everything's covered because we know when we leave, we just want to get out of there. It shows us that when we're focused like that and we make sure, During that time, we're not on Facebook as much. And we're not doing those time killers. We're just focused on what we got to do to accomplish it so that once we get out of here, we can get out of here. Imagine if we lived every week like that, where we didn't just surrender our life to these things that just steals our time. And then we're not under the gun, the pressure. Yeah. When we have more margin, it just makes the difference. So, 3 things for you. I hope that as you look at this, that you'll really be better at your time management, and it'll be helpful to you. Schedule what is most important. God has given us the opportunity to be in charge of our schedule. Now, you may think, well, not really, because I have to go to work. And you think about it. You really don't have to go to work. You choose to go to work because it works out better usually, right? But you still get to choose. Think, what is the most important things I need to add? Second, what can I say no to? These little no's that can just eat up my time. And then third, make the deadline where there's still margin in it, because that allows you to not only accomplish it and be proactive, but often you'll think of a better way to even do what the deadline was supposed to do. Here's what I think this looks like for us, for those of you who serve in a church, one of our church ministries. We need to be ready before guests. We need to be like Martha before the guests come. We need to be preparing everything and make sure we got all we have. And, whether you're setting up for children's ministry, setting up the bulletins, setting up our coffee, whatever you're doing. Now, you know what? Be ready, be proactive. And then 30 minutes before the service starts or your event starts, you're not doing tasks. You're there to enjoy the people. One of our values, we've talked about this a lot, it's all about relationships. Jesus is all about relationships. The church is all about relationships. It's not a system. It's not an organization. But we need systems and organization in order to facilitate the relationships. So they got to go hand in hand. But relationships are always what matters. But have you ever shown up at someone's house and they weren't ready for you? That's awkward, isn't it? Let's say, I don't mean like your neighbor friend who you could pop in at any moment, right? And it's okay because you've just been friends for a long time. But you show up to someone's house and, maybe it's your first time there. How weird would it be? And, they just look like their hair's a mess and they're still sweating because they've been running around. And then they're like, well, glad you're here. Really weren't expecting you. You're going, I'm 5 minutes late. What do you mean you weren't expecting me, right? And then you sit down on the couch and, she's still folding clothes or whatever. And you think, well, I'll help fold your underwear. Okay. What do you do? It's just sort of weird. Yeah, guests feel better when they know that you're ready for them. So we need to be ready. And then 30 minutes beforehand, we are there loving on and talking to and enjoying the relationship aspect. Church by the Sea people, listen, think about this. Just as God gives us an opportunity, at every hour we have, we get to choose what we do. Every Sunday is someone's first Sunday. Every guest we have is a gift from God. And he's saying, Church by the Sea, I am trusting you to represent me, to let this person know that they're loved, they matter, they're seen, and to share the truth of the gospel with them. That's what a guest is. They're never inconvenience. I was at a church one time. Oh my gosh, my head's going to explode. So give me a moment to make sure it's all together here. But we actually had a person say to a first-time guest, not here, this is years ago, you're sitting in my chair. I heard that and my head blew up. Like, we don't treat guests like that. Anyway, I'm not sure where I'm going with that other than we need to be ready. Each guest here is a gift from God. Never visitors. They're not visitors, they're guests. We need to be ready, and then we serve them and engage with them in a relationship. So anyway, I think that's Martha's problem. She needs to be better at her time management. Certainly there's some other things that we can learn, but I think for us, for you, I hope, maybe this will be helpful, again, very practical. As we go forward, don't just follow what you've been doing with your calendar. Schedule the things that are important. Say no to the things that aren't really important. And then create a deadline for your deadline. And I think as we adopt some of these things, and you'll probably come up with a couple more ways you can be even better at it, God will allow us to be great stewards of the time that he gives us as well as the opportunities that are in those moments. Please bow your heads.